She slid the eviction notice across the kitchen table like it was a restaurant check. My mother-in-law, Victoria, didn't even look at me when she said it. You have 72 hours to vacate this property. I suggest you use that time wisely instead of sitting around crying. I was standing barefoot on the cold tile floor of the brownstone in Back Bay, Boston, the home my husband had bought 3 years before we even met. The home where we'd painted the nursery yellow last month because we didn't want to know the gender. The home where, 6 days ago, I'd kissed him goodbye before his shift at Mass General, not knowing it would be the last time I'd ever see his face outside of a photograph. My name is Claire. I'm 31. I'm a registered nurse. And as of 6 days ago, I'm a widow carrying a 7-month-old baby in my belly, and apparently, according to the woman sitting across from me sipping chamomile tea, I'm also homeless. My husband, Daniel, was an orthopedic surgeon. Brilliant, gentle, the kind of man who'd stay 2 extra hours at the hospital because a patient's daughter was scared and needed someone to explain what was happening in simple words. He died in a 12-car pileup on I-93 during the worst ice storm Boston had seen in 15 years. He was driving home. To me, the highway patrol said he likely died on impact. They told me that was a mercy. I wanted to scream at them that there is no mercy in a 34-year-old man dying on a Tuesday night in February, but I didn't, because I couldn't speak. I hadn't been able to speak for almost 2 full days after I got the call. Victoria had been warm at the funeral. She held my hand. She cried into my shoulder. She told the guests I was carrying her precious grandchild and that we would get through this together as a family. That was Saturday. By Wednesday, she was sitting in my kitchen with a manila envelope and a real estate attorney on speed dial. I picked up the eviction notice. My hands were shaking, but I read every word. This property is held in a revocable living trust established by Daniel and Victoria Ashworth. Upon Daniel's death, sole control reverts to Victoria Ashworth as surviving trustee. I looked up at her. She was watching me now, and there was something in her eyes I had never seen before. A cold, calculating patience, like she'd been waiting years for this exact moment. He put the house in a trust? I asked. My voice sounded foreign, thin, and cracked. Victoria tilted her head. You didn't know? Daniel always listened to his mother on financial matters. He understood that protecting family assets meant keeping them in the right hands. I set the paper down. My baby kicked hard, right under my ribs, and I pressed my palm against the spot. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to scream. But I am a nurse. I have spent 11 years in emergency rooms and ICUs watching people fall apart, and the one thing I learned is that falling apart is a luxury you can only afford when you're safe. I was not safe. So instead of crying, I pulled out my phone and called a lawyer. Victoria's expression changed. Just slightly. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe, or irritation, that I hadn't simply crumbled. What are you doing? She asked. I'm calling an attorney, I said. Because this document says I have 72 hours, but Massachusetts law says a surviving spouse has occupancy rights regardless of trust structure, especially when pregnant. I may be grieving, Victoria, but I'm not stupid. She stood up so fast the tea sloshed over the rim of her cup. You ungrateful little nobody, I took you in. I let Daniel marry you even though you came from nothing, a nurse from some little town in Vermont with a mother who works at a gas station. And this is how you repay me? I kept the phone to my ear. My attorney picked up on the 3rd ring. That phone call saved me. At least temporarily. My lawyer, a woman named Grace Dow who specialized in estate disputes, told me the trust document was legitimate, but that Victoria couldn't force me out while I was pregnant. Massachusetts had strong protections for surviving spouses, and the eviction notice she'd given me wasn't even legally valid. But Grace also warned me. She said the trust was airtight. Daniel had signed it before we married, and unless I could prove he intended to change it, Victoria would eventually control everything. The house, his investment accounts, all of it. I hung up and told Victoria I wasn't leaving. She stared at me for a long moment, then smiled. It was the worst smile I've ever seen. Fine, she said softly. Stay. But you'll wish you hadn't. Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria made good on her promise. She didn't yell or throw things. She was far more sophisticated than that. She changed the locks while I was at my prenatal appointment and left me standing on the porch for 40 minutes in the freezing cold until a locksmith could come. She canceled the home insurance, then called the mortgage company to report a lapse. She had the utilities switched into her name and turned off the heat during the coldest week of February, telling me the furnace was broken. I woke up at 3 a.m. shivering, my breath visible in the dark bedroom, and found her in the living room wrapped in an electric blanket she'd brought from her own condo, perfectly comfortable. "Why are you doing this?" I asked her that night. My teeth were chattering. My baby was moving restlessly, probably cold too. She looked up from her book. "Because this was always my son's house, not yours. You were just passing through. And now that he's gone, it's time for you to go back where you came from." I didn't go back where I came from. I went to my friend Megan's apartment in Somerville and slept on her couch with 2 blankets and a heating pad. The next morning, I filed a police report about the utility shutoff. I contacted Adult Protective Services. I documented everything: the changed locks, the canceled insurance, the temperature inside the house when I'd left. Timestamps, photos, screenshots of text messages where Victoria told me to, and I quote, "Stop being dramatic and pack your bags." Grace, my lawyer, filed an emergency motion for spousal protection. A judge granted it within a week. Victoria was barred from interfering with the utilities or changing the locks. She was furious. She called me 17 times in one day. I didn't answer any of them. But here is the thing about people like Victoria. When they can't win through intimidation, they escalate. They find another way in. And Victoria's other way in arrived in the form of a man named Dr. Philip Haynes. I first heard his name 3 weeks after Daniel's death. Grace called me and said that Victoria's attorney had submitted new evidence to the probate court. A letter, supposedly written by Daniel, stating that in the event of his death, he wanted his mother to have full control of all assets and that I should receive a modest monthly stipend of $2,000 until I, quote, "got back on my feet." The letter was notarized by Dr. Philip Haynes, who was listed as Daniel's personal physician and longtime family friend. Daniel didn't have a personal physician named Haynes, I told Grace. His doctor was Dr. Kapoor at Mass General. I have the records. Grace paused. "Claire, this letter looks very real. The handwriting analysis will take weeks. In the meantime, the court may freeze all accounts pending review. That means the life insurance payout, Daniel's retirement fund, everything. You'll have no access." My stomach dropped. $2,000 a month in Boston with a baby on the way. Victoria knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to starve me out. That night, I sat at Megan's kitchen table and Googled Philip Haynes. What I found made my blood run cold. He was a retired physician, yes. He had a legitimate medical license, yes. But he'd been disciplined twice by the Massachusetts Board of Medicine, once for falsifying patient records and once for insurance fraud. He'd lost his hospital privileges in 2019, and when I dug deeper into his background, I found a photograph from a 2016 charity gala. Standing right next to him, champagne glass in hand, smiling radiantly, was Victoria. I called Grace at 11 at night. She picked up because that's the kind of lawyer she was. I told her about Haynes. She said, "Get me everything you can find." I did more than that. The next morning, I drove to the Probate and Family Court in Suffolk County and requested copies of every trust document filed under Daniel's name. It took 4 hours. I sat in the clerk's office with my swollen belly pressed against the edge of the table, reading page after page of legal language. And buried in the paperwork, I found something that changed everything. Daniel had filed an amendment to the trust. It was dated just 3 months before his death, submitted through a different attorney, not Victoria's. The amendment stated that upon his death, full ownership of the Back Bay property and all financial accounts would transfer to his spouse, Claire Ashworth, not to the trust. He'd also added a clause naming me as the sole beneficiary of his life insurance policy, overriding the original designation, which had listed Victoria. He knew. Daniel had known his mother might try something. He'd quietly, without telling anyone, rewritten the rules. But here's where it got complicated. When I showed the amendment to Grace, she frowned. "This was never processed," she said. "Look at the filing stamp. It's incomplete. Someone pulled this before it was entered into the system." "Someone at the court?" I asked. "Or someone with access to the attorney who drafted it," Grace replied. "Do you know who this lawyer is? Alan Whitfield, on State Street." I didn't. But I was about to find out. Alan Whitfield's office was on the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown. When I walked in, the receptionist looked at my belly, then at my face, which I'm sure looked like I hadn't slept in a month, because I hadn't, and asked if I had an appointment. I said no, but that I was Daniel Ashworth's widow, and I needed 5 minutes. Whitfield came out himself. He was maybe 60, silver-haired, with the kind of face that belongs on a judge. He took one look at me, and his expression shifted. Not surprise. Something closer to guilt. In his office, behind a closed door, he told me the truth. Daniel came to me in November, he said. He was worried about his mother. He said she'd been pressuring him to add her name to his accounts, to keep the trust structure intact, to make sure that if anything happened, she'd be in control. He didn't like it. He loved her. But he didn't trust her with your future. Then why wasn't the amendment filed? I asked. Whitfield looked at his hands. Because 2 days after Daniel signed it, I received a visit from Philip Haynes. He said he was there on behalf of the family. He told me Daniel had changed his mind and wanted to withdraw the amendment. He had a signed withdrawal letter. Let me guess, I said. The signature was forged. Whitfield closed his eyes. I should have verified. I should have called Daniel directly. But Haynes was convincing, and I was negligent. By the time I realized something might be wrong, Daniel was dead. And then Victoria's attorney contacted me and made it very clear that if I raised any questions about the original trust, there would be consequences. They threatened you, I said. Whitfield didn't deny it. He reached into his desk and handed me a folder. This is everything. The original amendment, Daniel's actual signature, the fraudulent withdrawal letter, and a recording. A recording? When Haynes came to my office, I had my security camera running. It captured everything. Him presenting the forged letter, him mentioning Victoria by name, him threatening me. I took that folder and walked out of that office feeling, for the first time since Daniel died, like I wasn't drowning. I had proof. Real, undeniable proof that Victoria and Haynes had conspired to steal my husband's estate while I was pregnant with his child. Grace filed an emergency motion the next day. She submitted Whitfield's recording, the forged documents, and my research on Haynes's disciplinary history. She also reported Haynes to the district attorney's office for fraud and forgery. Within 48 hours, a judge froze all trust assets and opened a criminal investigation. Victoria called me that evening. Her voice was shaking, not with sadness, but with rage. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You think some paperwork is going to stop me?" Daniel was my son. Everything he had came from me. You are nothing. You are a vessel, and once that baby is born, I will make sure I get custody. A grieving grandmother versus a broke nurse with no family? Who do you think a judge will side with? I recorded the call. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state. I saved it, backed it up to the cloud, emailed it to Grace, and went to bed. 3 days later, Philip Haynes was arrested at his home in Brookline. The police found additional forged documents in his study, not just mine, but for 2 other families he and Victoria had targeted over the years. It turned out this wasn't their first partnership. Haynes had been helping Victoria manipulate estate documents for over a decade, ever since her own husband's death, Daniel's father, a man who, according to the original police report, had died of a heart attack at 57. But the new investigation suggested otherwise. A detective named Reyes from the Suffolk County DA's office called me in for a meeting. She was young, maybe my age, with sharp eyes and a quiet intensity that reminded me of the best ICU doctors I'd worked with, the ones who noticed things nobody else did. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said, "we've been looking into Philip Haynes's relationship with your mother-in-law going back 20 years, and we've found financial records that suggest your father-in-law's estate was also manipulated after his death. Life insurance payouts redirected, property titles altered, the same pattern we're seeing now." "You think they did this before?" I said. To Daniel's father, Detective Reyes looked at me steadily. "I think your mother-in-law has been doing this for a very long time, and I think your husband figured it out, which is why he went to Whitfield in secret." My hands went cold. Daniel knew. He'd started protecting me months before his death. Not because he predicted an accident, but because he understood who his mother really was. All those times he'd changed the subject when I asked about family finances. All those quiet phone calls he'd take in the other room. He wasn't hiding something from me. He was shielding me. The investigation widened. Haynes, facing serious prison time, decided to cooperate. He gave a full statement confirming that Victoria had orchestrated the manipulation of both her husband's and her son's estates. He described meetings, payments, and a network of forged documents spanning 15 years. He also revealed something I hadn't expected. Victoria had been planning to challenge my fitness as a mother. She'd been building a case. She'd hired a private investigator to follow me. She'd paid a psychiatrist she knew socially to write a letter suggesting I was mentally unstable from grief. She'd even contacted my former employer at the hospital in Vermont, trying to find disciplinary issues in my work record. She found nothing, of course. My record was clean, but the fact that she'd tried, that she'd been systematically working to take my child from me while smiling at the funeral, while holding my hand and calling me family, that haunted me more than anything else. Victoria was arrested on a Thursday morning. I know because Detective Reyes called me to let me know before it hit the news. She was charged with fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Haynes faced the same charges plus additional counts related to the other families he'd victimized. The day of Victoria's arraignment, I didn't go to the courthouse. I went to the hospital instead. My water had broken. My daughter was born at 4:17 in the afternoon on a rainy April day at Mass General, the same hospital where her father had saved hundreds of lives. She weighed 6 pounds, 9 ounces. She had Daniel's dark hair and my stubborn chin. When the nurse placed her on my chest, warm and screaming and impossibly alive, I cried harder than I'd cried since the night he died. But these were different tears. Megan was there. Grace was there. Even Alan Whitfield sent flowers with a card that said simply, "Daniel would be so proud." In the weeks that followed, the court ruled in my favor on every count. Daniel's amendment was validated and entered into the record. The house, the accounts, the life insurance, everything was transferred to me as he'd intended. Victoria's claims were thrown out. Her custody threat evaporated the moment the criminal charges were filed. I moved back into the brownstone with my daughter. I repainted the nursery. I replaced the locks Victoria had changed and hung a photo of Daniel in the hallway where the morning light hits it just right. Some mornings I stand there with a cup of coffee and talk to him. I tell him about the baby, how she grabs my finger when she's falling asleep, how she makes a face exactly like his when she's concentrating on something. I went back to work part-time at a clinic in Cambridge. I didn't need the money anymore, but I needed the purpose. I needed to be Claire the nurse, not just Claire the widow. My daughter goes to a small daycare run by a retired teacher named Mrs. Okafor, who sings to the babies in Igbo and English and treats every child like her own grandchild. Victoria's trial lasted 3 weeks. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 8 years. Haynes got 12. On the day of sentencing, a reporter asked me how I felt. I said I felt tired. That was the truth. Justice doesn't feel like victory. It feels like exhaustion with a side of relief. A few months later, I received a letter. It was from Victoria, written from the correctional facility in Framingham. It was 4 pages long. I read it once, sitting at the kitchen table while my daughter slept in the next room. Most of it was self-justification, explanations about how hard her life had been, how Daniel's father had been cold and controlling, how she'd felt trapped. But near the end, there was one paragraph that felt different. She wrote that when she first saw me at the hospital after Daniel's accident, holding my belly and sobbing, something inside her had cracked. She said for a moment she had wanted to protect me. But then the old machinery started up, the fear of losing control, the need to be the one in charge, and she couldn't stop it. She said she was sorry. She said she knew I wouldn't believe her, and she didn't blame me. I put the letter in a drawer. I didn't write back. Maybe someday I will. Maybe I won't. Some doors don't need to be opened again for you to be at peace with them being closed. Last Sunday, I took my daughter to the park near our house. It was one of those perfect New England spring days, the kind where the cherry blossoms are out and the whole city smells like it's trying to apologize for winter. She was sitting on a blanket, chewing on a rubber giraffe, watching the world with those enormous dark eyes. A woman walking past stopped and smiled at her. She said, "What a beautiful baby. She looks just like her daddy, I bet." I smiled back. "She does," I said. "She really does." And for the first time in a long time, saying that didn't hurt. It just felt true. If you're watching this and you're going through something hard, something that feels impossible, I want you to know something. You are stronger than you think. Not because strength is loud or dramatic. Sometimes strength is just making one phone call, filing one piece of paperwork, getting out of bed one more morning when every part of you wants to stay under the covers. Sometimes strength is just refusing to disappear when someone is trying to erase you. Daniel used to say that the hardest bone in the body to break is the one that's already healed from a previous fracture. He said the scar tissue makes it stronger than it was before. I think that's true for hearts too. If this story touched you, please give it a like and subscribe to Private Family Secrets for more. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. You never know whose life you might change with a single story.